I'm Sebastian St. James. Today we will find out the very best place to keep your emergency fund. There are three choices. Choice number one is in a high interest savings account. In other words, in the bank. Option number two is the stock market. And option number three is a secret new option goes here. What does that mean? I can hardly wait. In a previous video, one of my viewers said, no physical gold in that emergency fund. Right about now, it makes sense to have some, I think, eh? So we'll add to that. Option number three is gold, physical gold. In a previous video, I showed the actual steps of me building a gigantic computer program that ran all the simulations which we're going to experience today. This simulation is totally unique to this channel, but today, in this video, we're going to take it one step further and multiply these powers. We're not going to do one simulation. Oh no, that's so last video. We're going to do 4 simultaneous simulations. That's right, all at the same time. I know, with great power comes great responsibility. The data I'm about to present to you is based 100% on real historical data. Take a look. So here's the bank, the high interest savings account over the last 20.7 years. Here's the S&P 500 total return, which means including dividends over the last 35.2 years. And now for a brand new index that's never been seen before on this channel, because I've just created it. That's right, only the Standard & Poor's and myself have the power to create new indices. So what is it? Introducing the new index, GOLD. And here it is. This is physical gold in US dollars over the last 31.2 years. Isn't it amazing? What we're doing by running multiple simulations is essentially we're creating a Monte Carlo simulation, which we actually arrive at some conclusions through a series of simulated runs. You get to discover the probable outcomes of if you actually took your money and invested in stocks, gold, or left your money in the bank through these simulations. Now, there are 2 things you should look out for. Number 1, obviously the outcome, who actually won at the end. That's very important. But secondly, and equally as important, what was the journey along the way? Did cash actually remain nice and stable? And did shares and gold go up and down, and whoa, too risky, I don't like the variations? The journey along the way and how comfortable you would actually feel holding that portfolio is equally as important. And the only way we can actually discover that is by actually going through the steps. Today I'll be simulating 10 years, so let's start simulating. This is Anna. She keeps 100% of her emergency fund in cash. This is Beth. She keeps 100% of emergency fund in the S&P 500, right, so in stocks. This is Caleb. He keeps up to 50k of his emergency fund in cash. Once he gets to that balance, he puts the rest in the S&P 500. But Caleb is in for a big shock. Wow, way to telegraph the end of the video, Sebastian. This is Trade Tech. I'm sorry, I seem to be missing a picture of Trade Tech. However, based on the comments that he's made on my channel, I believe I know exactly what he looks like. Firstly, he's male. He's actually a New Zealander, and he loves physical gold. So based on those parameters, I was able to find a rare photograph of Trade Tech that's never ever been seen in public before. So you're in for a real treat. This is Trade Tech, who always carries around his massive gold coin out in the New Zealand countryside. Look at that. Well, that makes sense. You've got to carry your gold with you. You can't be too careful these days. So, how much are each of my people going to earn? They're going to earn the average Australian income after tax. And what's that? Well, that's $52,108 per year. We'll take 20% of that, put that into the emergency fund, which is $868.47 per month. Now, to make this simulator totally accurate and comparable, which is the whole point of this, we actually pick a single day in history at random, and then we actually find out what's happening with stocks on that day, bank interest on that day, gold on that day, so every single measurement is on exactly the same day. In other words, real historical comparisons. Here is our first graph. Okay, we're off and running. What do we see there? We see 3 colours. At the bottom in red, the slightly wiggly line is actually shares. That's the S&P 500. At the top is another wiggly line, but this time in green. That is gold. And in the middle, the yellow, which is totally smooth, is actually money in the bank, and in this case it represents two people. Who does it represent? It represents Anna, who's always in cash. You can't see her blue line because the yellow line is sitting right on top of it. And that yellow line, of course, is Caleb, who at the moment is 100% in cash, right? So there's one yellow line, but it does represent two different people. In this simulation, you'll see cash as a perfectly straight line, except when there's a pay, and then of course it goes up. Because the line is perfectly straight, you'd be forgiven for thinking there's actually no interest on that. The shares go up, the gold goes up, but no, there's like no interest in the cash in the bank. Is that the case? Well, I decided I'd better prove it to you. What appears to be a straight line on April 19 is actually $2,607. Go forward to May 15, it becomes $2,613. Okay, so we've gone up by $6. Yes, that is your bank interest being applied. We've jumped forward in time. This is 6 months. Winning at the moment is green. Who's green? Green is gold. Cash is second, and shares is actually down the bottom, only by a little bit. Oh, simulation number 2. Interesting. Okay, so we're at the 6-month period. Brand new simulation. Other simulations connected at all? No, they're complete redos, okay? But this gives you a feeling for what happens if the world reset and ran again. Each of the 4 simulations is based on the same data, but they're actually different random picks, so they're all independent. In simulation number 2, at the 6-month mark, gold is in front, cash is second, and shares is down the bottom. That to me sounds like simulator 1, and yet it is brand new. Simulation number 3. Oh, what does that give me? Gold is at the top, shares is second, and cash is last. Okay. And simulation number 4. Well, that's tight, but if I zoom in there, gold is at the top, then shares is next, and then cash is down the bottom. Your daughter has decided to take up piano lessons. You've been told if you don't buy your daughter a brand new piano, you'll emotionally scar her for life. When I was growing up, people used to actually save for things over time, but today that is so old-fashioned. So it's a brand new expense out of your emergency fund of $5,000. Wow. After all, the emotional health of your over-pampered child is, of course, an emergency. There is a precipitous drop, but all the lines are on top of each other. You can't really see, so I go forward 1 month so we can see what the outcome of the drop is. As we see, gold is on top, cash is second, and shares is down the bottom. We've jumped forward in time. Okay, so we're at the 1-year mark. What's happening? Well, shares are up the top and cash is last. In simulation 2, I've got to zoom in there. Gold is up the top and shares are last. In simulation 3, gold is the runaway, you can look at that, and shares is slightly behind cash. In simulation 4, gold is the runaway again, and shares is behind cash. This is James, and James is your son. Because you wouldn't buy James a go-kart to whiz around the track at 100 miles an hour, you are a bad parent. And so James has run away from home. You've had to call out a search and rescue party. Wow. And that's $7,000 out of your emergency fund to pay for expenses. Oh, isn't having children so much fun? So when we eventually find the emotional tyrant, we find shares, well, they're very similar, aren't they, really? Shares are up the top with gold, and down the bottom is cash. We've jumped forward in time. Okay, so we're at the 2-year mark. Shares is in top, gold's fairly close to it, and look, cash has been left clearly behind. Simulation 2, shares is the runaway, and the rest are very close. Okay, if I zoom in, I find cash is actually second, and gold is down the bottom. Simulation 3, okay. Zoom in, shares is beating gold, and then cash is down the bottom. Simulation 4, gold is the complete runaway, cash and shares down the bottom, with shares being at the very bottom. You've decided to take your family for a lovely drive into the country. But oh no, you've run into a zebra. I know what you're thinking. How could you possibly not see that big-ass zebra right in the middle of the road? You could also be thinking, there's no zebras in Australia, but you'd be wrong. There is one actually in the Australian Zoo. Look at that. And it appears this one has escaped. You've been fined for hitting a zoo animal. Yes, well, of course I have. Why wouldn't I be? And that's going to cost you $11,000. Right, well, I'll watch out for zebras more in future. So simulation 1, we have shares in the top, cash is down the bottom. We've jumped forward in time. Now we're at the 3-year mark. Wow, gold is definitely running away, look at that. And cash, which is nice and stable, yes, but it's also falling behind. Simulation number 2, shares is in front, gold is actually falling behind cash. Look at that. Simulation 3 has gold at the top, Simulation 4, gold is the runaway and cash is last. Your wife tells you that she wants to look more like a model. Sounds good so far. Oh, so she has a cosmetic lip procedure. That's nice, honey. I'm sure somebody will love you. And that is going to cost you $12,000 out of your emergency fund. Because looking good is always an emergency. So we find gold is at the top, cash is last. We've jumped forward in time. Okay, so we're at the 4-year mark at the moment. So we have gold. Yeah, it's doing well, isn't it? It's running away. Shares is doing fairly well. And then cash, when it's at the bottom, have gold and shares actually outperformed cash and not going to come back? Yeah, I suspect so, but we'll find out. In Simulation 2, shares is the runaway and cash is at the end. Simulation 3, shares again is the runaway and, well, I'm going to have to zoom in there. Oh, gold is next and cash is last. Simulation 4, gold's first, then shares, then cash. Your son, yes, the one that ran away from home and you had to call out the search party, is feeling insecure about his looks. How unusual for a teenager. So he's going to have a face makeover, and why not? Mum had her lips done. That's going to cost you $14,000. Yes, why wouldn't it? We've jumped forward in time. Okay, we're at the 5-year mark. Well, gold is a clear runaway. Look at that. Shares is second, and then cash right down the bottom. Oh, shares is a runaway. Hang on. The other two are very, very close. If I zoom in, oh, look, I can't tell the difference. I think cash is next, and then gold is slightly below, but yeah, we'll call them the same. With Simulation 3, okay, goes shares, gold, and then cash. Simulation 4, gold is the runaway, and cash is last. Your fridge is broken down. It's about time. It was nearly as old as you are. Of course, Jerry, your next door neighbour, has a brand new internet fridge, so naturally you need one of those too. And that's going to cost you $12,000. Wow, for a fridge. Okay. A small price to pay so that your fridge can have its own internet page. And who wouldn't want that? We've jumped forward in time. Okay, so we're at the 6-year mark. Well, gold is running away, isn't it? Shares is doing quite well. It's above cash. In Simulation 2, well, shares is out in front. And look, gold is now starting to beat cash. It's about time, gold. You were very slow there. In Simulation 3, shares is in front and cash is last. Simulation 4, we have gold out front and cash is last. Your wife wants a pet zebra. Really? I mean, you did run one down in your car, so it's only fair that you replace it. So that's going to cost you $13,000. All right. Sometimes I wonder if we'd all be better off without a wife and kids. I'm just putting that out there. We've jumped forward in time. So now we're at the 7-year mark, okay. Gold is out in front, cash is trailing behind. In Simulation 2, shares is well out in front, look at that, and cash is behind. Let's see if there's any simulations where cash is actually keeping up. So far, it's not. In Simulation 3, it goes shares and gold, which are fairly close up the top, and then cash is a long way behind. Simulation 4, gold at the top, then shares, and then cash. Yeah, I don't think cash is keeping up at all. Your son reveals to you he has a secret passion, which he's had for his entire life. Okay, what is it and how much is it going to cost me this time? He wants to learn to ride a zebra. Fortunately, you happen to have one in the backyard, but you will have to pay for the riding lessons. So that is a $12,000 expense, which comes out of your emergency fund. We've jumped forward in time. Now we're at the 8-year mark. Gold is doing very, very well. Yeah, okay, I'm impressed with that. Cash is down the bottom. Simulation 2, shares is out in front. Cash is down the bottom. Yeah, your cash is just basically trailing now. And take your pick, which is in front, shares or gold. Well, it's gold in this case. Simulation 4, it goes gold, shares and cash. It turns out that keeping a zebra in your backyard in Australia is highly illegal. Who knew? Outrageous, that's what I say. So you're forced to buy a horse with a zebra jacket. I mean, they look basically the same to me. So that is a new $13,000 expense, which comes out of your emergency fund. We've jumped forward in time. All right, so we're at the 9-year mark. Gold is a complete runaway. Wow, impressive. Cash is last. Simulation 2 has shares at the front and cash last. Simulation 3, gold is at the top and cash is last. Simulation 4, it goes gold, shares and cash. It turns out that after losing your zebra, it sent your wife into a spiral of depression. But fear not, she's been seeing the best therapist that money can buy. And the therapist recommends that she paints her face like a zebra every day as a ritual of mourning. Arguably, she looked like a zebra before, but I'd never say that to her face. if you ever get an offer to marry this woman and have these kids, run. Her therapy is going to cost you $12,000. We've jumped forward in time to the end of the simulation. Alright, so how does this all end up? Simulation number 1. 10.1 years. God, gold is the runaway. Yeah, okay. There's no comparison there. Shares has done quite well, but of course cash is right down the bottom, okay? If you look back through the simulation, would you say at any point there, I'm afraid of running out of money because I did not invest in cash? The answer is no. I think you've done a lot better off by avoiding it. Simulation 2. Shares is a complete winner. Look at that. Gold has beaten cash. Cash is predictable, but doesn't get you very far. Simulation 3. Well, gold is a winner there. Shares and cash are much closer, and cash has come last. Simulation 4, our last one. Wow, gold is a runaway there. Shares is second and cash is last. So, how did our emergency funds actually fare? What is the final tallies? Well, in Simulation 1, gold came out with $133,000. That's nice for it. Shares, 38. Cash is 16. You will notice in all these simulations, cash will be a very similar amount. Simulation number 2, shares won with 38,000. Gold is 20k and cash is 14. Simulation 3, gold was 34k, shares was 17 and cash was 14k. In Simulation 4, gold 109. Wow, okay, that was a runaway. Shares 31 and cash 14. The simulations are over, but what conclusions can we draw based on the data? Is cash the best place for an emergency fund? No, the data doesn't support that. Over the medium and long term, cash underperformed gold and stocks in every one of our examples. Is it okay if I keep my emergency fund in 100% cash? Remember, I'm not here to specifically tell you where you personally should invest. I present you with the data, with my findings. I give you the options. But for most people, the data clearly shows investing your emergency fund in cash is actually suboptimal. Why does insert name here, finance commentator, say you should always keep your emergency fund in cash? Well, you'd have to ask them. The main reason, though, finance commentators across the board that you find on TV and YouTube don't actually do their own research. So what they do is they just regurgitate something they've heard somewhere else. That's why when I started this channel, originally my whole purpose was actually to do real research that furthered the understanding of finance here in Australia. And I believe I'm definitely achieving that. We've come out with some amazing original research. And of course, most finance commentators don't do any original research at all. Is it possible that shares or gold will underperform cash? Yes, in the short term, it certainly can happen. You may want to hold on to some cash for the first year or so to mitigate that. In the simulation, Caleb, which was a hybrid of cash and stocks, stayed in cash 100% of the time and never bought shares. What does this tell you? This tells me that if you actually spend your emergency fund rather than collecting it up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, that in most likelihood, if you have a hybrid approach where you keep, say, $50,000 in cash, putting the rest in shares, you'll never even get to shares. It just won't happen. Your expenses will actually keep eating away at your funds, and you will not actually be a hybrid. You'll be 100% cash. This is what's happened to Caleb. So, based on the research which we've done here, I no longer recommend a hybrid approach, where you actually keep a certain amount of cash at all times. Sure, in the first few years, keep some cash. That gives you some stability. But once your emergency fund is established, I find no credible reason to keep cash on hand. Does that mean I shouldn't keep any cash to pay the bills? No, you can keep some general cash around, but as far as emergency cash of large amounts like $10,000, $15,000, at a certain point you actually end up underperforming if you keep any cash at all. Does Trade Tech really look like your picture? Oh, here he is, yes, with his gold medallion and the sheep. Well, of course, he's a New Zealander who loves physical gold. What else would he look like? Is using gold or stocks riskier than cash? Well, at the very beginning, yes, potentially, sequence risk. What happens if the market crashes 3 weeks after you started your emergency fund? But as the fund actually grows, it doesn't really matter because actually cash becomes less safe than gold or shares. Why is this the case? Well, because the balance is lower. And so if you have an emergency that comes anywhere near that balance, you could be in trouble. But the gold and stocks keep going up and up and up, and they actually become safer over time relative to your cash. Does gold outperform stocks in an emergency fund? No, although my simulation actually did prove that. So what's the difference? Well, we were actually limited to the 20.6 years because that's when the high interest savings account with bonus interest. In other words, if you stuck your money in the bank right today, That's what you'd be expecting to put your money into. During that period, surprisingly, gold has done amazingly well. So that's the data I used, and therefore that is accurate based on that time period. But if I look actually back further, gold does not outperform stocks. I mean, you kind of know this intuitively. Nobody's saying, oh, you want to retire? Stick 100% of your money in gold. Whereas they might say stick 100% of your money in stocks. Okay, so you know intuitively that gold underperforms. But I haven't proven that to you, and so in a future video, we will revisit that. We'll actually do 2 videos where we actually compare stocks to gold and find out which is the better option. Okay, so we're going for much longer data, and we may actually do another simulation where we kick out cash and we just do stocks versus gold to see actually which one wins in the end. That would be interesting. In this video, I briefly described to you exactly what was going on with the simulation, but I didn't explain why. What's the logic behind it? What's the whole background story? What's the science? Fortunately, there is a previous video where I've actually given you all the scientific proof of exactly why my approach works, what the simulations are based on. Click here to see that, or if you've seen that, click here.